I've got this blog post from a few years ago that has some charts, and it talks about XY, where these are two cardioids placed, at the same, virtually the same position and pointed 90 degrees off one another. And you've got Bloom line, which is basically the same thing with bidirectional mics, and mid side with a cardioid and a bidirectional. And there are many others. You can even start to separate them a little bit with things like ORTF, and then you eventually can even start to use baffles between them. This is like just a foam sphere that people would use and put omni mics on either side to approximate what it sounds like to be a human listening, and then maybe get that baked into a recording. So Arco's asking, beyond these that have been documented and are standards, is it okay to experiment and set up your own stereo mic techniques? And if you are going to do that, what are some things you should be aware of?
Interesting. Yeah, you definitely can experiment. I think it's important to understand how human hearing works. And you also have to be thinking about how you're going to get information from the left ear separated from information for the right ear, and how much of that overlaps and how much of it's separated. And that's what those techniques that you were just going over are designed to do in different ways. Um, to me, there's there's coincident based stereo and there's time based stereo, and I think there's more room to experiment in the time domain than there is in the coincident domain. Um, there are probably ways of doing both. Um, I think the things that are interesting about stereo in that context are um, uh, playing with how big an image you really want and how that's going to present in your mix down the line. Um, so, one of the concepts that I teach, which is a little bit more advanced, is this idea of SRA, which is the stereo recording angle. Which is to say that the more in a coincident pair, the more increased or wide an angle you have between two microphones, the smaller the object will be generated in between two speakers, right? And there's an inverse relationship. So if you go tight, the image seems wider. Um, and when you deal in time-based stereo, which is to say two microphones that are not in exactly the same place, and you're not dealing with angle as much as distance between the two, the similar effect. The wider you go, the smaller that object is between the two speakers that you're trying to capture. And so, Glyn Johns is a good one, a good example of how you can create stereo without doing the things that are said in those, like the prescriptive methods you're showing in that document, Kyle, which is a great resource. But there's an example of like taking a microphone and putting it at the, by the snare, and then or the floor tom, and then another one overhead, to create an image of the drum kit that is not, you know, um, equally spaced from the snare kind of thing, or uh, with an idea of coincidence and positioning, but just based in time. So, yeah, I think where things get really experimental is when you start recording really big things. The louder the sound, the more time and space kind of matter less in some ways, but more in others. So you kind of have to experiment. Is there room for playing around? Absolutely, there is. Um, but you have to make it relatable to the human ear, and I think that's what usually ends up problematic when you experiment too much. Is you start to realize that while there's some funky sounds you get, they may have a lot of comb filtering in them, or they may not decode as well between two speakers, or the sound you're trying to ultimately capture may be distorted in some way that isn't flattering to your final presentation, right? Something you can't mix into some kind of way that makes sense. It might make sense the way you initially did it, but then when you get it among other instruments, it doesn't play nice. Um, and that's the poking around part. Um, and that gets more intense as you obviously go from like stereo to immersive setups and things like that. There's lots of room for experimentation, but you kind of have to keep some core principles uh, at heart as you mess around. And that's where I think learning about how binaural works, the way we hear in stereo, the sorts of information that we are constantly encoding and decoding through our brain stems about what we're hearing can help to inform where you might put some microphones. I don't know, Kyle. It's hard to give. It's a great question,
Yeah.
but it's not one that has a really good answer. It's like my least favorite question I'm ever asked as a professor is, "How should I mic this?" It's such a bad position to put me in because, um, first of all, I don't know. I can't hear the thing we're talking about, so I don't know what it sounds like. Um, I can't react to any of my first hypotheses, so I don't know if my first hypothesis is way off base or totally in the ballpark. And lastly, I don't know what you want it to sound like, so I don't know how to give. I can't give an answer to that. But what I love about the answer is that the correct answer that I also always feel like I give is like, I don't know. Go, you tell me. Go figure it out, and then you tell me what you find, and we can talk about that and discuss it objectively. So I think the answer I want to give is like, yeah, there's room to mess around. Go figure out which levers you want to pull. Go pull them, and show us what you come up with, and then we can talk about how successful it may be in a final product. But that's the thing about this is like there is a science to what we do, but at some point an art thing, and the art of application comes from being fearless in trying things and testing preconceived notions.